The manager refused service to the old black woman, without knowing she was the corporate CEO who had built the company from nothing and could fire him with a single phone call. 78-year-old Dr. Vivian Sterling stood in the marble lobby of Sterling Financial Group's downtown Chicago headquarters on that gray Tuesday morning in March, wearing a simple navy wool coat that had seen better days and carrying a worn leather handbag that her late husband had given her 30 years ago. To Brandon Mitchell, the 34-year-old customer service manager, she looked like exactly the kind of person who wandered in off the street seeking handouts or causing problems. Dr. Sterling had built Sterling Financial Group from a single storefront tax preparation service in Southside Chicago into a multinational corporation with offices in 12 countries and annual revenues exceeding $2 billion. She had started the business in 1967 with a $500 loan from her church congregation, working 18-hour days to serve families and small businesses that mainstream financial institutions routinely ignored or exploited. The journey from that cramped storefront to the 40-story glass tower where she now stood had taken 56 years of relentless determination, strategic vision, and unwavering commitment to serving communities that others had written off. The misunderstanding began when Dr. Sterling arrived at her own company's headquarters for an unscheduled visit to observe customer service operations from the perspective of an ordinary client. She had been conducting these informal assessments quarterly for the past decade, believing that the only way to ensure quality service was to experience it firsthand. Her usual approach was to dress modestly, avoid identifying herself as the company's founder and CEO, and interact with staff members as if she were any other potential customer seeking financial services. Brandon Mitchell had been working as customer service manager for Sterling Financial Group for 18 months. Hired based on his MBA from Northwestern University and his previous experience at a major banking corporation. He had never met Dr. Sterling personally, knowing her only as a name on company communications and the subject of the inspiring but somewhat abstract corporate origin story that new employees learned during orientation. The idea that the elderly black woman approaching his desk could be the legendary founder of the company had never crossed his mind. Dr. Sterling's appearance that Tuesday morning was deliberately unremarkable. She had chosen clothing that reflected her modest upbringing in rural Mississippi, where her grandmother had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12 years old. The navy wool coat had belonged to her mother, and Dr. Sterling wore it during these assessment visits as a reminder of the values and struggles that had shaped her approach to business and life. Her grandmother, Mama Louise, had worked as a domestic worker for white families while raising 5 grandchildren on wages that barely covered basic necessities. The lessons Dr. Sterling had learned from Mama Louise went far beyond financial survival. "Baby girl," her grandmother would say while mending clothes by candlelight, "when you got nothing, you learn what everything really costs. Rich folks don't know the price of bread because they never had to choose between eating and keeping the lights on. But when you understand that choice, you understand people." Those words had guided Dr. Sterling's business philosophy for 5 decades, shaping her commitment to serving customers that other financial institutions considered unprofitable or high risk. The transformation of Sterling Financial Group from neighborhood tax service to multinational corporation had been built on Dr. Sterling's understanding of communities that mainstream finance had abandoned. She had developed innovative products and services designed specifically for families with limited resources, immigrants navigating complex financial systems, and small business owners who couldn't access traditional banking relationships. Her company's success had been achieved not despite its focus on underserved communities, but because of the loyalty and growth that emerged when people received respectful, affordable financial services. Brandon Mitchell's approach to customer service had been shaped by his previous experience at institutions that prioritized wealthy clients and viewed lower-income customers as potential problems rather than opportunities. His training at Sterling Financial Group had emphasized the company's commitment to serving all communities, but the practical application of those values hadn't fully transformed his instinctive responses to customers who didn't present themselves as obviously affluent or sophisticated. When Dr. Sterling approached his desk that Tuesday morning, Mitchell's initial assessment was based on visual cues that triggered assumptions about her economic status and likelihood of becoming a profitable customer. Her modest clothing, aged handbag, and unhurried pace suggested to him that she was probably seeking basic services or information rather than substantial financial products that would generate significant revenue for the company. "Can I help you?" Mitchell asked, his tone professional but lacking the warmth and attention that he typically reserved for customers who appeared more prosperous. His body language conveyed subtle signals of impatience, as if he were already anticipating that this interaction would be brief and unproductive. Dr. Sterling's response was carefully calibrated to test the quality of service that ordinary customers received. "Good morning," she said, settling into the chair across from Mitchell's desk. "I'm interested in learning about your small business loan programs. I'm considering expanding a community service project, and I'd like to understand what financing options might be available." The mention of a community service project, rather than a traditional business venture, reinforced Mitchell's assumptions about Dr. Sterling's economic circumstances and serious intent as a potential borrower. His experience at previous financial institutions had taught him that vague references to community projects often indicated unrealistic expectations about loan eligibility or misunderstanding about commercial lending requirements. "Well, our small business loans require substantial documentation of income, assets, and business plans," Mitchell replied, his tone taking on a slightly condescending quality. "Most community service projects don't qualify for commercial lending because they don't generate sufficient revenue to support loan repayment. You might want to consider grant funding or charitable donations instead of business loans." Dr. Sterling's decades of experience in financial services allowed her to immediately recognize the dismissive assumptions underlying Mitchell's response. She had encountered similar attitudes countless times during her early years in business, when loan officers and business partners had routinely underestimated her knowledge, capabilities, and financial resources based on her age, race, and gender. The difference now was that she had the power to address such treatment directly, though she chose to continue her assessment before revealing her identity. "I appreciate your concern about loan qualification, Doctor," Sterling continued, "but I'd like to understand the specific requirements and application process. What documentation would I need to provide, and what are the typical terms for small business loans in the range of $2 to $5 million? The mention of such a substantial loan amount should have prompted Mitchell to reassess his assumptions about Dr. Sterling's financial sophistication and serious intent as a borrower. Instead, his response revealed the depth of his preconceptions about her economic circumstances and business credibility. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion about the type of funding you're looking for," Mitchell said, his voice carrying a patronizing tone that suggested he believed Dr. Sterling was fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of commercial lending. "Small business loans in the multi-million-dollar range require extensive financial statements, collateral worth significantly more than the loan amount, and detailed business plans prepared by professional consultants. These aren't the kind of loans that most community organizations or individual borrowers can qualify for." The interaction was unfolding exactly as Dr. Sterling had experienced during her quarterly assessments, revealing patterns of assumption and dismissal that contradicted the company's stated commitment to respectful service for all potential customers. Her decision to continue the conversation, despite Mitchell's increasingly condescending responses, was driven by her determination to fully document the problem before addressing it through appropriate channels. "I understand that substantial loans require thorough documentation, Doctor," Sterling replied, maintaining her calm demeanor despite the obvious disrespect in Mitchell's treatment. "I'm prepared to provide whatever financial statements and business plans might be necessary. Could you explain the specific application process and timeline for loan approval?" Mitchell's frustration with what he perceived as Dr. Sterling's unrealistic expectations became more apparent in his body language and tone. He glanced at his computer screen as if checking for more important tasks, then looked back at her with barely concealed impatience. "Look, I don't want to waste your time or mine," Mitchell said, abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy. Multi-million-dollar business loans are for established corporations with significant assets and proven track records. I can give you some brochures about our personal banking services and maybe information about small loans for individuals, but what you're describing isn't something that would be appropriate for someone in your situation. The phrase, "someone in your situation," carried clear implications about Mitchell's assumptions regarding Dr. Sterling's economic status, social position, and business credibility. His dismissal was based entirely on her appearance and his stereotypical expectations about elderly Black women and their likely financial circumstances. Dr. Sterling's response to this moment of explicit disrespect was shaped by decades of navigating similar situations while building her business empire. She had learned that direct confrontation in such circumstances was often less effective than allowing people to fully reveal their assumptions before demonstrating how wrong those assumptions could be. "I see," Dr. Sterling said quietly, her voice carrying a subtle authority that Mitchell was too focused on his own preconceptions to recognize. "And what would you recommend for someone in my situation who might have substantial assets but doesn't present themselves in ways that immediately communicate their financial capabilities?" The question was designed to give Mitchell an opportunity to reconsider his approach and demonstrate whether he was capable of learning from feedback. His response would determine whether this situation could be resolved through education and coaching, or whether more serious intervention would be necessary to address discriminatory treatment of customers. Mitchell's response revealed the depth of his prejudicial assumptions and his inability to recognize the teaching moment that Dr. Sterling had carefully created. "Ma'am, I think you're misunderstanding how business lending works," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that Dr. Sterling had encountered countless times during the 1960s when she was building her empire in a world that refused to take Black women seriously. "People with substantial assets don't usually come in here looking like—" He paused, gesturing vaguely at her appearance. "Well, like they need help with basic banking services." The gesture and unfinished sentence transported Dr. Sterling back to 1967, when she had walked into First National Bank of Chicago wearing her best Sunday dress, the same navy blue that she wore today, seeking a business loan to expand her one-person tax preparation service. The loan officer, a man not much older than Mitchell, had looked at her the same way and said almost identical words. "Colored women don't usually understand business finance. Maybe you should try the community credit union instead." That rejection had been the catalyst that transformed Dr. Sterling from a small-time tax preparer into a financial services revolutionary. She had walked out of First National Bank that day with a burning determination to create the kind of financial institution that would never make assumptions about customers based on their appearance, race, or economic background. The company that Mitchell now worked for had been born from that moment of discrimination, built specifically to serve people who looked exactly like the woman he was now dismissing. Dr. Sterling's journey from that humiliating bank rejection to building a $2 billion corporation had been shaped by every slight, every assumption, and every door that had been slammed in her face. In 1968, when she opened her first real office on South State Street, she had been one of only 3 Black women in Chicago who owned financial services businesses. The other 2 had failed within 18 months, unable to secure the capital and credibility necessary to compete with established white-owned firms. The secret to Dr. Sterling's survival and eventual dominance had been her grandmother's wisdom about understanding the true cost of everything. While her competitors focused on wealthy clients who could afford to pay premium fees, Dr. Sterling had built her business around the enormous underserved market of working-class families, immigrants, and small business owners who needed financial services but had been ignored or exploited by mainstream institutions. Mama Louise had died in 1972, just as Sterling Financial Group was beginning to show substantial profits, but not before seeing her granddaughter featured in Ebony magazine as one of the most successful black businesswomen in America. "I told you that education was the only thing they couldn't take away," Mama Louise had whispered during her final hospital visit, her weathered hands still strong enough to squeeze Vivian's fingers. "But you took it further than I ever dreamed. You made sure other folks got educated too, educated about their own worth." The education Mama Louise referenced wasn't just about Dr. Sterling's business success. It was about the thousands of families who had learned to build wealth through the financial literacy programs, homeownership initiatives, and small business incubation services that Sterling Financial Group provided alongside traditional banking products. By 1975, the company had helped more than 10,000 families purchase their first homes and had provided startup capital for over 3,000 minority-owned businesses. The civil rights era had shaped every aspect of Dr. Sterling's business philosophy, but not in the way that most people understood. While others focused on protests and legislation, she had chosen to create economic power that couldn't be voted away or reversed by changing political winds. "They can change the laws," she had told her first employees in 1970, "but they can't change mathematics. Money talks in every language, and wealth speaks louder than any politician." Mitchell's continued dismissive treatment was revealing patterns that Dr. Sterling had thought her company's training programs had eliminated. The customer service protocols she had personally developed emphasized treating every potential client with respect and attention, regardless of their appearance or apparent economic status. The fact that a manager could work for Sterling Financial Group for 18 months without internalizing these fundamental values suggested serious gaps in hiring, training, or supervision. "Mr. Mitchell, Dr. Sterling said, her voice carrying a subtle shift in authority that decades of boardroom experience had taught her to modulate precisely. "I'm beginning to understand that there might be some disconnect between your company's stated values and the actual service that customers receive. Could you please explain Sterling Financial Group's policies regarding customer treatment and service standards?" The question was a trap that Mitchell walked into without hesitation. His response demonstrated that he knew the company's official policies, but had never connected them to his own behavior or understood their practical application in situations like this one. "Of course, we treat all customers with respect," Mitchell replied, his defensive tone revealing his awareness that the conversation had shifted in ways he didn't fully understand. "But we also have to be realistic about matching services to customer needs and qualifications. It doesn't help anyone if we encourage unrealistic expectations about products that clearly aren't appropriate." Dr. Sterling's decision to continue the assessment rather than immediately revealing her identity was driven by her need to fully document the scope of the problem before addressing it through proper channels. She had learned during her decades in business that premature intervention often allowed problematic employees to modify their behavior temporarily without addressing underlying attitudes that would resurface in future interactions. "I appreciate your concern about realistic expectations," Dr. Sterling continued, "but I'm curious about how you determine what's realistic without reviewing actual financial documentation or conducting proper customer assessment procedures. Are you trained to make eligibility determinations based on visual evaluation of potential borrowers?" The question forced Mitchell to confront the contradiction between his actions and the company's established procedures. But his response revealed that he was more concerned with defending his assumptions than examining their validity or appropriateness. "Look, I've been in financial services for 8 years, Mitchell said, his voice taking on an edge that suggested growing irritation with what he perceived as Dr. Sterling's persistent questioning of his professional judgment. "I can usually tell within a few minutes whether someone is a serious prospect for substantial business lending. People who qualify for multi-million-dollar loans don't usually need to ask basic questions about application procedures. They come in with attorneys and accountants and detailed proposals." Dr. Sterling's response to this moment of explicit prejudice was informed by 56 years of building relationships with customers who had been dismissed by other institutions. Her success had been built on recognizing that wealth and sophistication often appeared in forms that traditional bankers didn't recognize or value. "That's an interesting perspective," Dr. Sterling replied, her tone remaining calm despite the obvious disrespect in Mitchell's treatment. "In your experience, what percentage of Sterling Financial Group's most profitable clients arrived for their first consultation with full legal and accounting teams? And how many substantial loans has the company originated from customers who initially presented themselves as ordinary community members seeking basic information?" The questions were designed to force Mitchell to confront data that would contradict his assumptions, but they also revealed Dr. Sterling's intimate knowledge of the company's customer acquisition patterns and lending history. A careful observer might have wondered how an elderly woman seeking information about community service funding could ask such sophisticated questions about corporate lending practices and customer demographics. Mitchell's growing frustration with the conversation was evident in his body language and increasingly dismissive responses. He had expected this interaction to be brief and routine, but Dr. Sterling's persistent questions and obvious knowledge of financial services were forcing him to defend positions that he had never been required to articulate or examine. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. "Ma'am, I think we're getting off track here," Mitchell said, his professional facade finally cracking completely. "I've tried to be patient and explain why your request isn't realistic, but you seem determined to argue about policies and procedures instead of accepting reasonable advice. If you're really interested in community funding, I can give you some brochures about personal banking services or contact information for local nonprofit organizations that might be more appropriate for your needs." The dismissal was complete and explicit, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's assessment of Dr. Sterling's worthiness as a customer or his willingness to provide the respectful service that every client deserved. His suggestion that she seek help from nonprofit organizations rather than legitimate business lending services revealed assumptions about her economic status that were both insulting and entirely wrong. Dr. Sterling's response to this moment of total disrespect was shaped by decades of transforming such experiences into opportunities for education and institutional improvement. She had learned that the most effective way to address discrimination was often to allow it to be fully expressed before demonstrating its consequences. "I see," Dr. Sterling said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that Mitchell was still too blinded by his prejudices to recognize. "Before I consider those alternatives, I'd like to speak with your supervisor about the customer service standards that Sterling Financial Group maintains. Could you please arrange for me to meet with whoever oversees your department's operations?" The request for supervisory intervention was the moment when Mitchell should have recognized that this interaction had escalated beyond routine customer service into potential complaint territory. His response would determine whether this situation could be resolved at the departmental level or whether it would require more senior management attention. Mitchell's response to Dr. Sterling's request for supervisory intervention revealed the full extent of his arrogance and his complete failure to recognize the gravity of the situation he had created. "Ma'am, I am the manager of this department," he said, his voice carrying a tone of finality that suggested the conversation was over. "There's nobody else you need to speak with. I've explained our policies clearly, and I've been more than patient with your questions. If you're not interested in the services we can actually provide, then I think this meeting is finished." The dismissal was so complete and contemptuous that Dr. Sterling felt the same burning anger that had driven her to build Sterling Financial Group in the first place. But 5 decades of business leadership had taught her that anger was most effective when channeled into strategic action rather than emotional reaction. She reached into her worn leather handbag and withdrew a business card that would transform this interaction from customer service failure into career-ending catastrophe. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Sterling said, her voice taking on the quiet authority that had commanded boardrooms for decades. I think there may be some confusion about the reporting structure here at Sterling Financial Group. Perhaps you could help me understand who supervises the customer service operations for this division. Before Mitchell could respond, the elevator doors across the marble lobby opened to reveal Patricia Hendricks, the Senior Vice President of Customer Relations, returning from a meeting with the company's board of directors. Hendricks had worked for Sterling Financial Group for 12 years, rising through the ranks based on her exceptional ability to build customer relationships and her deep understanding of the company's values and mission. Dr. Sterling recognized Hendricks immediately, though she made no gesture of acknowledgement. Patricia Hendricks was one of the rising stars in the company's leadership structure, someone Dr. Sterling had been personally mentoring as part of the succession planning process that would eventually transition the company to the next generation of leaders. Hendricks' arrival in the lobby at this precise moment was coincidental, but Dr. Sterling decided to use the opportunity to test whether the customer service problems she was documenting were isolated to Mitchell's department or reflected broader institutional failures that required more comprehensive intervention. "Excuse me," Dr. Sterling called across the lobby, her voice carrying just enough authority to command attention without revealing her identity. "Could you please help me? I'm having some difficulty getting appropriate customer service, and I'd like to speak with someone who can address my concerns." Patricia Hendricks' immediate response demonstrated the customer service standards that Dr. Sterling had spent decades establishing throughout the organization. She approached quickly, her expression conveying genuine concern and professional attention. "Of course," Hendricks said, extending her hand in greeting. "I'm Patricia Hendricks, Senior Vice President of Customer Relations. How can I help you today?" The introduction sent a shock through Mitchell that was visible in his sudden change of posture and expression. He had just spent 30 minutes dismissing and disrespecting a potential customer in front of a senior vice president who had the authority to end his career immediately. His attempts to interject and control the narrative were obvious and desperate. "Ms. Hendricks, I was just explaining to this lady that her request doesn't really fit our lending criteria," Mitchell began, his voice taking on a nervous quality that hadn't been present during his dismissive treatment of Dr. Sterling. "She was asking about multi-million-dollar business loans for some kind of community service project, and I was trying to direct her toward more appropriate resources." Dr. Sterling's decision to allow Mitchell to continue digging his professional grave was strategic. She wanted Patricia Hendricks to witness firsthand the kind of treatment that customers received when they didn't present themselves as obviously wealthy or sophisticated. "I see," Hendricks replied, her tone neutral, but her expression suggesting growing concern about what she was hearing. "And what specific information did you provide about our small business lending programs and qualification procedures?" Mitchell's response revealed that he had provided virtually no actual information about the company's services, instead focusing entirely on discouraging Dr. Sterling from pursuing her inquiry. His summary of the interaction made clear that he had made assumptions about her eligibility without conducting any of the standard assessment procedures that the company required for all potential commercial lending clients. "Well, I explained that multi-million-dollar loans require extensive documentation and that most community projects don't qualify for commercial lending," Mitchell said, his defensive tone making obvious his awareness that his handling of the situation was being evaluated. "I suggested that she might want to look into grant funding or nonprofit resources instead." Patricia Hendricks' experience in customer relations allowed her to immediately recognize the problematic assumptions and inadequate service that Dr. Sterling had received. Her response was professional, but carried clear implications about the seriousness of Mitchell's failures. "Mr. Mitchell, could you please explain which specific assessment procedures you followed to determine this client's eligibility for our lending programs?" Hendricks asked, her tone making clear that she expected detailed documentation of proper customer service protocols. The question forced Mitchell to acknowledge that he had conducted no assessment whatsoever, making his dismissal of Dr. Sterling's inquiry a clear violation of company policies and professional standards. His attempt to justify his assumptions based on visual evaluation only deepened the evidence of discriminatory treatment. I used my professional judgment based on 8 years of experience in financial services, Mitchell replied, his defensiveness making obvious his understanding that his position was becoming untenable. When customers come in asking vague questions about community projects and multi-million-dollar loans, it's usually pretty clear that they don't understand what's involved in commercial lending. Dr. Sterling's decision to intervene at this moment was precisely timed to maximize the educational impact for both Mitchell and Hendricks. She reached into her handbag and withdrew the business card that would reveal the full scope of Mitchell's catastrophic error in judgment. "Ms. Hendricks, Doctor," Sterling said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had built a financial empire. "I think it might be helpful if I provided some additional context about my inquiry and my relationship with Sterling Financial Group." The business card that Dr. Sterling handed to Patricia Hendricks was elegant in its simplicity. Dr. Vivian Sterling, founder and chief executive officer, Sterling Financial Group. The gold embossing caught the light streaming through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, and the weight of the cardstock reflected the gravitas of the position it represented. Patricia Hendricks' reaction to the business card was immediate and profound. Her eyes widened as she read the name and title, and her expression shifted from professional concern to something approaching horror as she realized the full implications of what she had just witnessed. "Dr. Sterling," Hendricks said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I am so deeply sorry for the treatment you've received. This is absolutely unacceptable and completely contrary to everything our company stands for." Mitchell's reaction to the revelation was a study in cognitive dissonance and escalating panic. The elderly black woman he had spent 30 minutes dismissing and disrespecting was not only a legitimate customer, she was the founder and CEO of the company that employed him. Every assumption he had made, every condescending comment he had offered, and every dismissive gesture he had displayed had been directed at the person who had ultimate authority over his continued employment. The color drained from Mitchell's face as he processed the magnitude of his error. He had not merely provided poor customer service, he had revealed deep-seated prejudices and discriminatory attitudes while treating the company's founder with open contempt. His attempts to apologize and explain were incoherent and desperate. "Dr. Sterling, I had no idea. If I had known, I was just trying to follow proper procedures," Mitchell stammered, his professional composure completely shattered by the realization of his situation. Dr. Sterling's response to Mitchell's panic was measured and educational rather than punitive. Her decades of building the company had taught her that individual failures often reflected systemic problems that required comprehensive solutions rather than simple punishment. "Mr. Mitchell," Dr. Sterling said, her voice carrying the teaching tone that had guided thousands of employees over 5 decades. "The issue isn't that you didn't recognize me. The issue is that you treated someone you perceived as poor and powerless with disrespect and dismissal. Every customer who walks through these doors deserves the same level of professional attention, regardless of how they're dressed or what assumptions you might make about their economic circumstances." Patricia Hendricks' understanding of the situation's implications extended beyond Mitchell's individual failure to encompass broader questions about hiring, training, and supervision that would require immediate investigation and comprehensive response. Her role as Senior Vice President of Customer Relations made her directly responsible for ensuring that such discriminatory treatment never occurred within the organization. "Dr. Sterling, I want you to know that we will conduct a thorough investigation of this incident and implement whatever changes are necessary to ensure that our customer service standards are maintained at all levels," Hendricks said, her professional training allowing her to focus on institutional improvement even while processing the emotional impact of witnessing such blatant discrimination. The conversation that followed would determine not only Mitchell's future with the company, but also the broader changes necessary to ensure that Sterling Financial Group's commitment to respectful, inclusive service was reflected in every customer interaction throughout the organization. 2 hours after the lobby confrontation that would become a case study in corporate ethics programs nationwide, Dr. Sterling sat in her corner office on the 40th floor, looking out at the Chicago skyline while Patricia Hendricks presented the findings of her preliminary investigation into customer service practices throughout the company. The view from her office window encompassed the South Side neighborhoods where she had started her business 56 years earlier, a daily reminder of the communities and values that had shaped every decision in building Sterling Financial Group. The investigation that Hendricks had conducted revealed that Mitchell's discriminatory behavior was not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern of assumption-based service delivery that contradicted the company's stated commitment to inclusive customer relations. Interviews with other staff members, review of customer complaint records, and analysis of service delivery metrics showed systemic gaps between corporate values and actual customer experiences. Dr. Sterling, I've identified at least 12 customer complaints over the past 18 months that describe treatment similar to what you experience today, Hendricks reported, her voice carrying the weight of professional disappointment and personal responsibility. These complaints were filed against different staff members across multiple departments, suggesting that our training and supervision protocols haven't been effective in preventing discriminatory attitudes from affecting customer service. The scope of the problem was both disturbing and illuminating for Dr. Sterling, who had believed that the comprehensive training programs and diversity initiatives she had implemented would prevent such systematic discrimination. The realization that her company had been failing customers in ways that contradicted its fundamental mission prompted her to authorize the most comprehensive organizational review in Sterling Financial Group's history. Brandon Mitchell's termination had been immediate and non-negotiable, but Dr. Sterling's response to the broader institutional failures went far beyond punitive measures to encompass transformative changes in hiring, training, supervision, and accountability systems throughout the organization. Her approach reflected 56 years of experience in building sustainable organizational culture, rather than simply addressing individual problems. The first change Dr. Sterling implemented was the establishment of a customer dignity initiative that would fundamentally restructure how Sterling Financial Group approached customer service training and evaluation. The initiative included mandatory unconscious bias training for all customer-facing employees, revised hiring criteria that emphasized empathy and cultural competence alongside technical qualifications, and new performance evaluation systems that measured respectful treatment of all customers regardless of their apparent economic status. The training program that emerged from the Customer Dignity Initiative drew heavily on Dr. Sterling's own experiences with discrimination and her understanding of how assumptions about appearance, race, age, and economic status could undermine the quality of financial services. Each training session began with Dr. Sterling's personal story about being rejected by First National Bank in 1967 and the determination to create an institution that would never make similar assumptions about potential customers. Every person who walks through our doors has a story we don't know and potential we haven't seen, Dr. Sterling told the first group of managers who participated in the new training program. My grandmother cleaned houses for 50 cents a day, but she understood financial principles that helped me build a $2 billion company. If you judge people by their clothes or their grammar or their age, you'll miss opportunities to serve customers who could become our most loyal and valuable relationships. The implementation of the Customer Dignity Initiative required significant changes in corporate structure and resource allocation, but the results were immediate and measurable. Customer satisfaction scores improved dramatically, complaint rates dropped to historic lows, and employee engagement surveys showed increased pride in working for an organization that aligned its practices with its values. Patricia Hendricks' role in leading the initiative enhanced her reputation within the company and positioned her as Dr. Sterling's likely successor in developing customer relations strategy for the next generation of corporate leadership. Her ability to transform a moment of institutional failure into an opportunity for comprehensive improvement demonstrated the kind of visionary thinking that Dr. Sterling had spent decades nurturing throughout the organization. The changes at Sterling Financial Group attracted attention from business schools, civil rights organizations, and corporate diversity consultants who recognized the initiative as a model for addressing systemic discrimination in customer service across multiple industries. Dr. Sterling's willingness to acknowledge failures and implement comprehensive solutions rather than defensive responses established new standards for corporate accountability and social responsibility. 6 months after the lobby incident, Dr. Sterling received a letter from Maria Santos, a small business owner whose loan application had been approved after she reapplied following the implementation of the Customer Dignity Initiative. Santos's first application had been rejected by a loan officer who made assumptions about her English language skills and business sophistication based on her accent and appearance. The new training protocols had enabled different staff members to recognize her potential and approve funding that allowed her family restaurant to expand into catering services. Dr. Sterling, Santos wrote, "Your company gave me a chance when others saw only limitations. My restaurant now employs 12 people from our neighborhood, and we're planning to open a second location next year. Thank you for creating a place where people like me are treated with dignity and respect." The letter was one of hundreds that Dr. Sterling received from customers whose experiences with Sterling Financial Group had been transformed by the systemic changes implemented after the Mitchell incident. Each story reinforced her understanding that corporate values meant nothing unless they were reflected in every customer interaction and every employee decision. The annual shareholders meeting where Dr. Sterling announced her retirement plans included a presentation about the Customer Dignity Initiative and its impact on both customer satisfaction and corporate profitability. The data showed that respectful, inclusive customer service was not only morally correct, but also financially beneficial, as customers who felt valued and respected were more likely to develop long-term relationships and recommend services to family and community members. We learned this year that our success depends not just on what we do, but on how we do it, Dr. Sterling told the assembled shareholders, board members, and employees. Every customer interaction is an opportunity to honor the values that built this company or to betray the trust that our communities have placed in us. The choice is always ours, and the consequences affect not just our business results, but our integrity as an institution. Patricia Hendricks' appointment as Dr. Sterling's successor as CEO was announced during the same meeting, with explicit recognition of her leadership in transforming customer service standards and her commitment to maintaining the inclusive values that had defined Sterling Financial Group's mission from its founding. The transition plan included ongoing mentorship from Dr. Sterling and continued expansion of the Customer Dignity Initiative to Sterling Financial Group's international operations. Dr. Sterling's final act as CEO was the establishment of the Mama Louise Foundation, a nonprofit organization that would provide financial literacy education and small business support to underserved communities nationwide. The foundation was funded with a substantial portion of Dr. Sterling's personal wealth and was designed to extend Sterling Financial Group's mission beyond traditional banking services to encompass community education and economic empowerment. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. The transformation of Sterling Financial Group from a company that could employ someone like Brandon Mitchell to an organization recognized as a national model for inclusive customer service demonstrated the power of leadership that was willing to confront uncomfortable truths and implement comprehensive solutions. Dr. Sterling's response to discrimination within her own company reflected the same determination that had driven her to build a financial empire from a single storefront tax service. 3 years after the lobby incident that had exposed systemic failures in customer service, Sterling Financial Group was featured in Harvard Business Review as an example of how organizations could successfully address institutional discrimination while improving both employee satisfaction and financial performance. The article included interviews with customers, employees, and industry experts who credited the Customer Dignity Initiative with establishing new standards for corporate social responsibility in financial services. Dr. Sterling's legacy extended far beyond the financial success of the company she had built to encompass the thousands of lives that had been changed by access to respectful, affordable financial services and the organizational culture that prioritized human dignity over profit margins. Her story became required reading in business schools and corporate training programs, demonstrating how individual acts of discrimination could catalyze institutional transformation when leaders were willing to acknowledge problems and implement comprehensive solutions. The elderly Black woman, who had been dismissed as a poor customer seeking inappropriate services, had used that moment of disrespect to create changes that would benefit countless future customers who might otherwise face similar discrimination. Her response to prejudice was not revenge, but education, not punishment, but transformation, and not resignation, but determination to ensure that such treatment would never happen again in an institution that bore her name and reflected her values.